Hello and welcome to Talking Europe. Slovakia is the first NATO country to have delivered warplanes to Ukraine. Slovakia is one of Ukraine's top donors if you compare its wealth to other countries, the two nations sharing a border of nearly 100 kilometers. Slovakia, a country of around 5 million, was part of the Soviet bloc but gained its independence 30 years ago. It joined both NATO and the European Union in 2004 and the Eurozone in 2009. In spite of its firmly Western and Atlanticist leanings, Slovakia remains one of the most dependent in the EU on Russian energy, something that Bratislava is trying to change. My guest is Rastislav Káčer, Slovakia's Minister for Foreign Affairs and European Affairs. He's held both posts since last September. Previously, he was Slovak ambassador to the United States, to Hungary, and to the Czech Republic. And in the early 2000s, he was instrumental in negotiating Slovakia's entry to NATO. Minister, thank you so much for being our guest.
Hello, thank you for inviting me.
Let's talk about the MiGs first. I've heard some experts say that because they're quite old, they'll give Ukraine an advantage in quantity rather than quality. What would you say to that?
First of all, it's a piece of technology which they can use. So we talk of modern airplanes, F-16s or whatever will be of Western provenience. It's extremely complicated. It's not easy to switch over. It needs training, experience, and all of the support which comes with it. MiG-29s is what they use, what they can maintain, what they can repair. So I think this is the most efficient thing which can be done today. We do it also, Poles do it. I think that will be a substantial boost of the capacity.
You have this deal with the United States to get F-16s as a replacement. But that, I believe, won't happen until next year.
Yes,
so does that
correct.
leave you with a hole in your national security in the meantime?
Well, for a while, but I wouldn't call it a hole because as a part of NATO, we have many ways how you substitute for that. It also applies to our air defense because this was not only MiGs. It was the first donation of fighter aircraft, but Slovakia was also the first one to send to Ukraine in an early stage a whole system of air defense, S-300, which was also of the Soviet provenience. It's quite efficient system, and it's also what Ukrainians can use. This was a bold move a year ago, and our system was substituted by NATO advanced presence in Slovakia. So we got American, Dutch, and German Patriots. Now Americans rotate out, and Italians are coming with their own air defense system.
The question of ammunition supplies to Ukraine, the European Commission has announced the Act in Support of Ammunition Production, or ASAP, which is in English, of course, also an acronym for as soon as possible.
Yes.
How soon is soon then? What is as soon as possible?
Yes, yesterday was late, as we say, but Slovakia is one of the countries within the EU, and there are not too many of us. I think it's around 9 or 10. Who's got capability to produce these large caliber ammunition. Slovakia was part of Czechoslovakia. Czechoslovakia was known in the past for quite a substantial capacity in defense production. In Slovakia, here was the part of these heavier systems. So we are good in large caliber barrels for artillery, but also large caliber ammunition, and we do 155, which is much in need. So we've been supplying since the beginning something which was already in the stock and something which we could produce by the speed. And now within the program agreed with EU, we can multiply capacity, and we are doing that. So it's these days program is finalizing. Commissioner Breton was visiting Slovakia. We are going to double the investment and double the production, probably more than double the production.
What are the chances, according to you, of Russia cutting you off from its energy because you're still very dependent on natural gas, on oil, and nuclear fuel as well?
Here, the most critical is nuclear fuel. This is not that easy to switch because technology which we use, it's not easy to get the fuel from alternative sources. We work on that heavily, also cooperating with France on that. My Minister of Economy is visiting Paris and we are in advanced talks also with Americans, Westinghouse, etc. So here, this is the most critical part. We will need some time. Oil, that's a little bit critical but replaceable, and we already replaced. We now have around, I guess, 60% dependability, but this can be done. This is not that hard. And gas, we almost crossed over. So without gas, it won't be that critical.
So you don't really have an overall date for becoming fully independent, I suppose.
That's very hard. That's very hard to set. We work very hard on being independent. This is done in coordination with other members. I think in gas we can be independent if that was critical anytime soon. With oil, it will take probably a month.
And nuclear, not so much either.
Well, it's a question probably of a year or two.
But one thing which is relevant to this is your request for a revamped Repower EU plan with that 403 million extra euros, which is obviously part of that is going to be about implementing reforms such as building renovation, sustainable transport and so forth. So this is all about the energy transition.
Yes, quite a lot. Transition to green. So it's a part which would be happening anyway because we want Europe cleaner and greener. That's no question. But also it's making a high diversity in resources of energy.
But the extra money that you're requesting, does that mean you get more onto debt? Will it be through loans then, which means that you have to repay loans?
I think it's a combination. Some is a direct help from the EU, from common sources like any other country where there was a certain key agreed, and then the portion is as a part of investment or a sophisticated loan.
And so that is a financial burden at a time when you've got quite sluggish growth and you had the highest inflation in 22 years earlier this year.
Yeah. Well, I think this concerns all of us. In the region, Slovakia is one of the Eurozone countries, so we got inflation lower than our neighbors. I think the peak is in Hungary, where it was coming almost to 30%. Slovakia was half of that, and it's coming down. In Eurozone, when we are part in Poland and Czech Republic, they are not. Austria is of our neighbors. We are a little above the average in Eurozone, but I think inflation is a problem. It's a malady for all of us in Europe. But it looks like a good on a good trend, to say.
You were ambassador, as I said in the introduction, to Hungary. Your country obviously has historical ties, a shared border with Hungary. Would you have any, perhaps, advice or thoughts on how EU leaders that don't know Hungary as well as you do, how they should approach Prime Minister Viktor Orbán?
No, it's very hard. We were part of two marriages. The Hungarian marriage was the long one. It was 1,000 years marriage, and Czech was only 70. With Czechs, we divorced peacefully, and we remained great friends. With Hungarians, divorce was more complicated, probably because this was a long 1,000 years relationship, and it's still like you a little bit with your ex, thinking who was hurt more and who got a fair deal and who's got fair share and who not. So this is a little bit of that. When we are asked this kind of question, I said, probably we might not be very credible to reply because we might be seen biased. But what I see as a problem is that it's a policy of Orbán's government towards Kremlin, where they are very friendly to the regime, but also the internal evolution, the questions of rule of law. The Commission is now talking how much to bind the money or cut the money to Hungary, etc., etc. But I don't want here to be one of those who would publicly be too critical because we might be seen as a bias. We are not happy.
Right. But you're in favor of engagement rather than, as, for example, some MEPs in the European Parliament to take a very hard line, sanctions, sort of take a very strong arm approach using legal instruments. You're not in favor of that sort of approach overall.
Well, I think we need to have certain red lines. And I think as a collectively, we need to say what kind of evolution is acceptable and where we then say, no, this is the bar which will not go lower. I think Hungary is now somewhere at that bar. And this is not about Hungary. This is about principles which binds Europe together. Because if we should stay as a united community, if Europe should stay strong, and I think and I believe that Europe should go into closer integration, should go into, we need that strategically in globalized world, then we we need to have these red lines, and we need to be able to say whatever. If it's Hungary, if it was Slovakia, which will be eroding one day, God forbid, then the same equal instruments should apply.
The former Prime Minister of Slovakia is trying to come back to power, and he says that if he was to achieve that, he would veto what he calls pointless sanctions on Russia that harm European Union members more than they harm Russia. Are you concerned? Is this just media hype, or would you be concerned about a new Bratislava-Budapest axis on Ukraine if this were to happen?
Yeah, well, probably this is kind of Viktor Orbán virus, which he caught over the border. I'm concerned, of course. I don't think this is only a pre-election talk, because we start the pre-election campaign. Elections will be at the end of September. So it is part of pre-election campaign, but I think he's serious. So we need to be concerned. And if he wants to do, as he's saying, I want to do things in Orbán way, I think I'm very concerned personally, because I lived for 5 years in Budapest. And I was not happy to see the erosion of the rule of law, quality of democracy, and shifting slowly towards a kind of semi-authoritarian or smart authoritarian regime, which is very much in the same bed with Mr. Putin. And it's weird, because if you would remember of 56 in Hungary, if you remember all the socialist Soviet domination to which Russia is now the heritor, that is really a strange bedfellowship, what we see. But if Mr. Fico was really successful and was able to create a government which will do it like Mr. Orbán, I think that will be an issue of serious concern.
We'll have to see what happens in September. Thank you so much for being my guest, Rastislav Káčer, Foreign Minister and Europe Minister of Slovakia. Do join me for part 2 of Talking Europe. I'll be with my panel of MEPs in the European Parliament. Don't go away.